Good Tuesday morning, everybody. Welcome into the Volquest podcast. I'm Eric Kane with Matt Ray, Brent Hubbs, and Grant Ramey here today. As always, this episode is brought to you in part by our friends over at Exterior Home Solutions. For a free estimate, you can give them a call today if you have any home remedy, any repairs, any upgrades you want to do. Give them a call today at 865-524-5888. Or you can visit them online at exteriorhomesolutions.com. As always, if you're watching this on YouTube, like this video and get this out in front of more Tennessee fans. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We got an awesome promo deal going on right now over at volquest.com. And there's no better time really to check it out than right now, because we got recruiting going on right now. Your fall camp starting in just a couple weeks. $1 for 1 month. New subscribers only over at volquest.com right now. Take advantage of this awesome deal and join us on the General's Quarters. All right, guys, I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of revisit. We were actually asked this on the Mailbag podcast last week, but we discussed this back in the winter and spring, and now in the summer heading into fall camp. Realistic expectations for Tennessee football. Kind of what are they for you? And we can kind of go around the room a little bit, but Matt, we'll start with you. Tennessee coming off a 10-win season in the regular season. Got an 11th win in the New Year's Six bowl game, defeating Clemson in the Orange Bowl. You lose a lot of firepower, but still return an awful lot. What's realistic expectation for Tennessee this football season?
Well, I think we touched on this a little bit, and I think a lot of it comes down to Joe Milton, keeping Joe Milton upright. What does tackle play look like? You've got some questions to answer there. Do you win the ones you're supposed to? I think Texas A&M's a big swing game for the Vols. You still have to go on the road to Florida early in the season and prove that you can win there. So there's some question marks out there. I mean, I think Rob shot it around 9 to 10, last week on the Mailbag podcast. For me, I think it's probably 9 right now going in. I want to see some more questions answered during fall camp. I won't say that 10's out of the realm of possibility, but I think 9's probably the safe number to be at right now as we learn a little bit more about this football team in the next 2 months.
For me, I'm working on position previews that get started on Monday, and so I've been diving into those and looking at things, and I did some preview stuff and some spring recap stuff as well. So I've looked at a lot of different numbers, and I think sometimes stats are overblown, as we all know. But there's a couple things that stand out to me, Grant, when I look at this team. One, and this is not a stat, but one, how in the world do they handle expectations? When really they were, it's been a honeymoon, right? There was no expectations in year one. Year two, you thought they would be better, but they certainly exceeded anybody's expectations with a win over Alabama and obviously beating Florida. Now they are perceived to be or have arrived, and a lot of people are calling them contenders, and they're saying this and saying that about them. So how does this locker room handle expectations? That's one. And two, for me, what is the offense? How do they adapt to Joe Milton's game? Because it's not Hendon Hooker's game. And Hendon bailed him out of so many issues so many times with his legs. I'm not saying Joe can't, but I don't know that Joe can do – I don't think Joe can do what Hendon could do with legs. So how many gotcha plays does Joe Milton fix like Hendon did a year ago? Those are my two big picture questions when you don't talk about specific positions and, kind of diving into the tackle spot and all these other things. Those are my two biggest things that jump out to me right now.
I thought last year once expectations kind of started to build, I thought they handled it pretty well in terms of they kind of kept going after beating Florida at home the way they did to do what they did against Alabama. Obviously, you go to Georgia, that's a pretty good football team. They don't play too well in Athens, and you lose that game, and obviously you fall on your face at South Carolina. But to answer the way they did after the disaster that was South Carolina and to beat Vanderbilt, a bad Vanderbilt team, 56-0, but to beat that team the way they did, and then to beat Clemson the way they did and show up the way they did in the Orange Bowl. So expectation-wise, I thought that was kind of steps forward. But I think when we talked about this probably back in the spring, my expectation was don't expect it to be 2022 every single year and 11 wins be the floor. I mean, maybe that's what it is moving forward down the road a little bit, but right now it still feels like I kind of agree with Rob. You can go down the schedule and, they could lose to A&M, they could lose to Alabama, they could lose to Georgia, and you still have 9 winnable games on the schedule. I think it all just kind of circles back to, and this is something Austin's talked about. You look at Florida, and you might not think that Florida's in the best spot. And, Phil Steele put out his top 40 preseason. Florida, I don't think, was in that top 40. So nobody's really expecting anything out of the Gators. But you still got to go to Gainesville, and you still got to prove that you can win down there, a place that Tennessee hasn't won in however many years and, X number of times over the last, few decades, whatever that number is. So you got to go down there and kind of, I think, set the tone early for what kind of season it's going to be. Because if you go down there and trip up on that one, then I'm not exactly sure what's next. I don't think UTSA is a game to sleep on. Obviously, South Carolina, Tennessee should be motivated and ready for that one. But I think it goes back to Florida, September 16th, and kind of how they go from there. And I agree with there's a ton of questions when you go across the position groups. Quarterback, you don't know what Joe's going to be until you consistently see it. And you don't know what this offensive line is going to be until you see the five that are out there and how they play. And I think that goes for a lot of different position groups on both sides of the ball. So for right now, they should win a lot of ball games. I don't think it's going to be 2022, but there's still a ton of unanswered questions that make you wonder about this team.
Well, here's the other thing too. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it doesn't feel, similar in a lot of ways to last year in terms of how the schedule shapes up. But I think you circle that Florida game every year. But as far as a game that, I won't say make or break, but kind of is a pivot point right there in week 4. It's just so big. It was so big last year. You had to win that game. And, this year, again, you've got to get that monkey off your back in the swamp. I mean, feels like when you look at the series history between those two, these past 2 games are as big as any on the Tennessee side of it right now, at least.
Yeah, and listen, nobody's sleeping on Kentucky either, because I know that there's a couple of posters who are pretty adamant that Kentucky's a bigger challenge this year than Florida is for Tennessee. I'm not buying that, because I do count the history, and I do remember that Tennessee was in control of that game last year, and Florida's throwing in the end zone on the last play of the game. So there's a monkey to get off your back, much the same way Kentucky's trying to get a monkey off their back about Tennessee, because they have lost that game seemingly every way possible for forever, with the exception of a couple of bizarre games, that head scratchers. Tennessee's had their number in every way. But coming off of Alabama, going to Kentucky is not going to be an easy task. There's no doubt about that. That will be a game that is a challenge. I mean, it'll probably be a night game up there. It'll be cold, and you know how that'll go. So I don't think anybody's sleeping on that game. But for me, it's the Florida game, because it is the tone setter that you guys were talking about. Here's the other thing, too. And this is just, you can't control this. And I know Tennessee had a critical injury last year with Cedric Tillman that they were able to overcome. What they haven't had, Grant, is they haven't had critical injuries in the line of scrimmage when you look at it. I mean, Tennessee has 85 starts returning on the offensive line, if you count John Campbell's starts at but then you look at what Jerome Carvin and Darnell Wright had. They had 80 starts among the 2 of them at Tennessee. Both of them played right at 2,000 snaps in their career, and played every snap last year. Wright did, and Carvin had 43 career starts. So, you've been pretty fortunate, Grant, that you haven't had that injury bug, and you've been able to see what one major injury to do. Now, they overcame the Hendon Hooker injury the last 2 games of the season. Bad Vanderbilt team helped. They were able to overcome Cedric Tillman because of Ramel Keaton. But what happens if they do have an injury on the offensive line? Because there's nobody behind those guys in the depth chart that's lined up and played in this league for any significant amount of time.
No, and you have to be encouraged with what they've done at the skill positions when you have those guys get hurt and somebody steps up. And, yeah, it's a different story in the trenches on both sides of the ball, on the offensive line especially. I've thought during the first 2 years of the Heupel that obviously Darnell Wright being picked where he is, he's a really good football player, and he was picked there for a reason, and he proved it. He earned it, whatever, he got there. But it feels like you never really had to worry about that offensive line, regardless of who the 5 were that out there. If they had to mix and match at times, if they didn't have the same guys out there every single time, it felt like they were going to get something done just because of the way this offense moves, the quickness it goes with, the way they run the ball, the way they spread the wide receivers out. The kind of the design of the offense almost supports that offensive line a little bit more. Now you're talking about that's one of the unanswered questions. One of the many is, what are your best 5 offensive linemen and what do they look like and what combination? And if you don't have anybody behind them, obviously, one critical injury there, and that could derail you. But I think you have to be encouraged by what you've seen from this coaching staff in the past based on the offensive production, including the offensive line, that even if there is an injury there, you think this offense could keep going because of the design and the speed with which it moves, I guess.
I was going to be my next question, and Grant, you kind of dove into it a little bit. It's almost like having blind faith in Josh Heupel in this offense. You never want to have blind faith because that's when you can get in trouble. But if you go back and look at his stats as a play caller in this league, as a head coach for 5 years, I mean, he's had top 10 offenses. He's had a number of different quarterbacks, and Joe Milton will be another different type of quarterback that he's had. But the run game's still been there, and the offense has still been explosive. So when I think of kind of from a broader perspective, Brent, when I think of expectations for Tennessee, I mean, I don't think Tennessee's going to have the number 1 offense in the country, but I still kind of think it's going to be up there. And if you're going to be scoring points, 37, 39, 40 points a game, and your defense takes a step to where we think it's going to because you're deeper in some spots, I mean, there's no reason for me not to think that the expectation should be kind of where you were last year. But if you finish with 9 regular season wins, it's not the end of the world. That's not a bad season. At least that's how I view it.
Well, and I think you're exactly right when it comes to, and I don't think it's wrong to assume this, the belief that the offense is going to be explosive and are going to do things. I mean, Josh Heupel's offense scored 30 or more points 12 times last year. I mean, I know go back and look the year before that they did it, I think 9 or 10 times. I mean, everywhere he's been, they've scored points. And so when the belief is that they're going to score points, then it's, can you make just a handful of plays on defense, Grant? I mean, it's not like you've got to come in and say, okay, we got to win this game 10-9. You got to hold this team to 9 points to have a chance to win. Nobody's going to the ball yard thinking that, because this offense has been so good for so long everywhere Josh Heupel's been. That creates and enhances the expectations when you look at the schedule. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that anybody's going to predict Tennessee to win less than 9 games this year. I mean, that feels like 9's almost a floor. Now, that's kind of crazy to say, but that's kind of what it feels like when you look at the offensive numbers that they put up in 2 years in this system.
I think in the past there have been expectations around the Tennessee football program, and they've failed miserably in some of those seasons. But I think what's different this time is, how long has it been since Tennessee was coming off an 11-win season? 22 years, right? Since 2001. It was the last time they were number 1 in any kind of ranking of, 25 years ago, whatever it was. When was the last time they were talking about coming off a win over Alabama at home, or coming off a win against Florida, or whatever? I mean, just to start the season the way they did last year, to surprise everybody, to keep going the way they did, to have a Heisman front runner at quarterback, to even, like Brent talked about 2 years ago. I mean, they scored 28 points in the first quarter twice in 2021, if I remember correctly, at Missouri, and against South Carolina. They put 62 up at Missouri. They hammered South Carolina at home with a very depleted roster that Heupel inherited in year 1. So I think it feels a little bit different when you talk about expectations, because internally there has to be a different sense of confidence with this group, because they've seen it happen. It happened on the field. Like, there's not a lot of Tennessee teams that can lean on the stuff that this team can lean on from last season. And no, it's not the same exact team. You lost a lot of important players, but it's the same coaching staff, and it's the same guy calling the plays that you've seen put up a ton of points. And like Brent said, just make a handful of stops. So I don't know, Matt, if you have anything on that. Like, just, it feels different internally. You would think internally there's going to be a different confidence, because this team's proven it, or at least a lot of these guys on this roster have proven it based on what they've done the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Grant. I mean, I think when you look at it, to me, 2 guys that I think have hit off really well on this team are both from a similar area geographically in the country, and that's Ramel Keaton and Caleb Webb. Ramel Keaton was the most overshadowed guy on this roster heading into last fall, but man, was he huge, and we've talked about that a lot. Tennessee return, they lose Jalen Hyatt, they lose Cedric Tillman, but they return some talent at that receivers position. Brew McCoy back, Ramel Keaton back, ceiling appears really high for Dante Thornton and Squirrel Watt. But again, like to Brent's point about injuries earlier, who's that guy that's Ramel Keaton this year? It could be Caleb Webb, it could be Chaz Nimrod. You've got to answer some of those questions. But, I think what some of these older guys that are back have, now experienced some of this. It's leading the younger guys in a good direction. And those things translate. You talk about a handful of stops each game. That's what Tennessee needed a lot of times last year. When they got them early and they were able to have offensive success, they started to roll a little bit. Again, I think, for Tennessee, they got off the field a lot when it mattered last year. They couldn't get off the field. I mean, you couldn't help them off the field against South Carolina at times. They walked into a buzzsaw that night, but they got off the field at times against Georgia when they needed to. So, again, get off the field, score points. You have to believe, I think, that you have a chance to win ball games. And I think that's the biggest difference for this team under Josh Heupel, is that they know that they're going to score points and they're going to have a chance to win ball games.
Yeah, it's interesting. Two things, Eric. I said earlier, not all stats are important, but I keep throwing stats out at everybody for whatever reason. Ramel Keaton had the second highest average per completion last year on this team. And in 2 seasons, Josh Heupel has had 6 different receivers with 450 plus yards receiving, which is bananas numbers. So I say all that to say this too, because I'm going to contradict myself. I know it's a great shock to everybody. But I talked when we first started talking about this topic, I said, can this team handle expectations? Yeah, that's a concern. But the bigger concern is when you don't have expectations, right, Grant? And this is a program that spent a long time not really having expectations. I mean, maybe there was some hope, hey, maybe we can be a little better than we think. So there's a balancing act there of handling expectations and that being a, quote, concern about in your locker room versus a locker room that embraces the expectations because they believe that they're a good team because of what they've proven to themselves. I think Tennessee's kind of in that world right now, which is a pretty interesting place. Are they going to sort of step over, and turn those expectations into annual type things? Or are they going to say, well, we can't handle the pressure when everybody's talking about us? But I think you've got to have some expectations to have a chance to win. And I'm not sure this program's had enough of that the last few years.
And I think it's a kind of a rare time where the outside expectations probably kind of meet what the local expectations might be for this football team. Like, yeah, I think they're a top 25 team. I don't think they're a top 5 team. They're probably around that top 15, hovering in that area. I think it's right to have questions about or wondering what Joe Milton can give you and how consistently he can give you and what this offense looks like with Joe versus what it looks like with Hendon. It would be one thing if they were expected and being picked to win 10, 11 games and you didn't think that was going to happen, but it feels like there's kind of a mesh point where it feels like the expectations for this team to be a 8, 9, 10 win football team and kind of, I don't think this is a bridge year or anything like that, but you're kind of wondering what's next for this program after what Hendon Hooker did the last 2 years. So I think it's one of those times where it feels like the expectations are kind of right where they need to be. They're not too low. They're not too high. It feels like they're right there in the middle.
Yeah, I am a little surprised, though, Matt, that the Joe Milton love, that they just the ascension that Joe Milton is a Heisman candidate. He's just going to – and look, Joe was terrific when he came in mop-up duty last year, and he played well against Clemson. I throw the Vanderbilt game out because they got a lead, and they said, look, throw it deep. If you complete it, great. If not, we'll punt it. No big deal. So I kind of throw that one away. But I am a little surprised at the national Joe Milton love. Not that he's not deserving of some hype and some expectations. I'm not saying that. But there's a lot of everybody jumping on the Joe Milton train this offseason based on him being the backup last year for Tennessee. I'm a little surprised by that outside noise nationally. Be curious to see how Joe handles that himself individually. That's different than team expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. That's a lot different than team expectations, and it's hard not to get caught up in that a lot of times. One of the things for me, I think, with Joe Milton, when he's getting that love, and not that he necessarily doesn't deserve that, but I think it goes back to something we said earlier. Maybe Eric said a little bit about blind faith in Josh Heupel. putting up points. If he's going to be the guy, then I think the outside expectations from some of these national folks is that if he's going to be the guy under Josh Heupel, that it's just going to work, and it did work for 2 games. He like you said, he was excellent in mop-up duty. It worked against Vanderbilt. You can kind of throw that one out the window. And I thought Joe was good against Clemson. He was more decisive, extended some plays, had a couple of really good throws. The throw to Brew McCoy in the end zone was just one of the better throws you're going to see all year in all of college football. And I think if he's upright and able to stay in there, that's some of the stuff you'll see from him this year. Tennessee's going to attack the middle of the field more regularly with Joe Milton, and they're going to try to unlock his, potential with his arm. But again, there's just a lot there, that I think still left to be answered heading into this season.
I think it's a Heupel factor. I think it's a built like Cam Newton and throwing it 80 yards at the Peyton Manning Passing Academy factor. Yeah. What I liked about Clemson specifically is there were times where he was holding on to the ball a little bit too long. He took a couple sacks or some 3-and-outs. It didn't look like the Tennessee offense that we had seen all season with Hendon Hooker running the show. And the way he responded to those, it didn't snowball and turn into something worse. The way he stepped into the pocket and threw those touchdowns to Squirrel and to Brew in traffic in the end zone, those darts. The way he hit Ramel Keaton, I mean, as open as Ramel Keaton was, it's pretty easy to get a little too excited and put that ball 5 yards past where it needs to be. But for him to just see Ramel and step up and throw it and put it right where he needs to be, I thought that was impressive. So I think it's a Heupel factor. I think it's a size. I think it's an arm. I think it's what he did against Clemson on a pretty big stage on national TV, a New Year's Six bowl game. I think that's kind of the multiple factors where people are really kind of buying into what Joe can do this time around.
I mean, Clemson was without a couple of guys, but overall, top to bottom, top 3 defense you saw all year.
Yes.
So, Georgia, Alabama, and then Clemson. I mean, if you started talking about defenses heading into the season last fall, those were the ones that everybody had as a top 3. And, I think Clemson was still there at the end of the season. Maybe it was Miles Murphy that was out, but Brian Brzee played, and Darnell Wright had a really good day against him. But overall, a very talented Clemson defense from top to bottom.
My question with Joe, and until we see it, I don't know what it's going to be, is his pocket presence. And we were discussing this on the board the other day in one of the threads. His pocket presence in terms of just sensing pressure, and also just reading the defense and taking off and running and getting what he needs to get at certain times when he needs to get. I thought Hendon Hooker was really good at that, at just taking off with it when he needed to extend drives and to keep things going in the right direction. I want to see that from Joe, and kind of how it looks compared to what it looked like in 2021 early in that year, and what it looked like when he had the ball mop-up duty this past season.
You don't want this from a quarterback at all times, Grant. You tell me if I'm wrong. You don't want this from a quarterback at all times where, pre-snap Vince Young in the USC, national championship, I'm going to be the one that makes the play here. I'm getting to the corner. Right. But there are times when you need that, and Hendon Hooker did that. For me, with Joe Milton, you talked about him, bouncing back from some of those plays, being able to step up in the pocket and deliver. I think for him, that's the next step, is just continuing to ascend in confidence.
Right.
We saw it against Pitt. He struggled with some overthrows and never bounced back from holding the ball too long, in his first, season at Tennessee. He obviously progressed as the backup and looked good. Now, where does that confidence level go? It doesn't need to be too high, but there are times when he needs to say, I want the ball in my hands. I'm going to be the guy that makes the play here.
I think we're all excited to see what Joe Milton can be this year, leading the Tennessee offense, and if this offense can reach those expectations that, Josh Heupel's offenses have reached the past 5-6 years of play calling in this league and as a head coach. So we got plenty more coming up here on the Volquest podcast. But first, I want to tell you about a friends of ours, a proud sponsor of the show. That is Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs, they make you look good. Fabric company, shorts and pants for men, you and me alike. They got these stretch khaki shorts designed for a slimmer fit through the thigh and leg that truly gives you a sculpted look. Now, the shirts, they do the exact same thing as Lululemon do, but they fit way better because those shorts are made of some stiff, restricting cotton. But Bird Dogs fixed this issue with inventing a cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so that it gives you a slimmer fit but doesn't sacrifice any movement. The versatility with Bird Dogs, again, I've got slacks, I got shorts, warm in Omaha, out to eat, some beer with the boys, into the press box. You can go on a date with these. You can wear them to church. The versatility versatility is endless for casual or for business attire. Bird Dogs has got you covered. And I'm going to give you a promo code right now, okay? If you go to birddogs.com and use this promo code VQ, see this little Yeti-style tumbler I've been drinking out of all episode long? I've got some coffee in it right now, but this past weekend I had some beers in it. At night I have some water in it. They keep the ice cold temperature or heat for you hours upon hours, and it looks just like a Yeti. So if you go to birddogs.com right now, put in the promo code VQ, you're going to receive this Yeti-style tumbler with your order. Again, that is birddogs.com/VQ, promo code VQ. You're going to get this free Yeti-style tumbler. You're not going to want to take your Bird Dogs off. I promise you that. And as always, let's get a quick word from our proud sponsor of the Volquest podcast. That is Exterior Home Solutions.
Your roof, it's the most important protection against nature for your home or your business. That's why I trust the experts at Exterior Home Solutions.
As always, big thank you to Exterior Home Solutions for making this coverage of the Volquest podcast possible. SEC Media Days, it is next week, right? This time next week, there will be teams at the podium, coaches and players alike. Tennessee will take to the podium on Thursday, and it was announced yesterday the 3 players who will be representing the University of Tennessee. No surprise, but some pretty good representation there. You got quarterback Joe Milton, tight end Jacob Warren, and defensive lineman Amari Thomas. Grant, these 3 representatives, any surprises? Anybody that you thought might be there in place of one of these 3?
No surprises for me. My only real expectation, I didn't really try to sit down and guess who these 3 were going to be, but it felt like it was going to be Joe Milton and whoever else, 2 other guys, because I think Joe Milton's a guy that he said all the right things. He's done all the right things. He handled everything the last couple of years with Hendon Hooker the right way. He never said anything publicly that would bring bad light on the pro. I mean, it's felt like every time the camera's on, he's got a big smile on his face and he's saying the right thing. And that's what you want out of your redshirt senior quarterback. He's been around. He's seen everything. He's done everything. It makes sense for him to go to Nashville this time, not Hoover, not Atlanta, to Nashville. Thank God. Sorry, had to get that in there.
There were some players that could have certainly went. I mean, Aaron Beasley's the guy that could have went. Cooper Mays is the guy that could have went. I mean, there's plenty of representatives up there. But Brent, I think the purpose of this is, you know who your quarterback is. So Joe Milton goes. There's a lot of teams around the SEC that didn't send a quarterback because they're a little unsure right now. But you want to send players who will speak highly of your program and not give anybody else bulletin board material, essentially. And these 3 players, Jacob Warren and Amari Thomas, aren't going to do that. They speak to us regularly throughout the season. There's kind of a strategy behind it, and so that's why I think these 3 make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I hope that we're past and coaches are moving past this idea that you got to shield or protect some player from the media, that the young quarterback, the sophomore quarterback, is not ready to handle that spotlight. I mean, these guys are on social media. They're interacting with fans. They're getting dog bare. I mean, like, they know everything that's out there. There's a lot more savvy to this. So take your best football players, take your football players that generate the most publicity for you, and the players that the media wants to speak with, right? Because, I mean, does anybody in the media at SEC Media Days, of course, it's the last day, last group. It's getaway day, right, Grant? There won't be, the world won't be there. But nope. Is there anybody there who's going to do a story on Tennessee who doesn't want to talk to Joe Milton? Nobody, right? Okay, so you're going to put Joe Milton in. I mean, kudos, even though, I mean, like, put your best player out there. Coaches don't, like, not bring or not hide or something. Now, if you don't know who your quarterback's going to be, I mean, if Alabama's not bringing a quarterback, I get that. But bring your most talked about, ballyhooed players, and I think hopefully we've gotten to that, because there's a couple years where some SEC coaches left everybody at the house, right? And it was like, you're bringing who? So I think the commissioner has said, let's do a little better. And I think finally some schools are coming around to the idea of, you know what? NIL, they're doing their own stuff anyway. They can do anything they want to do out there. So why not bring those guys and put them in front of the media and let them represent your program?
Matt, when you look at these 3 players, obviously, Joe Milton, he's the leader of this football team. He carries himself that way, and that's a big reason why he's there. But Jacob Warren's a guy that we've had this conversation a little bit in the last couple of weeks when we think about who's going to represent Tennessee. Jacob Warren never really came to mind for me, because he's so soft-spoken and unassuming. However, I mean, he's the leader of this football team. He's coming back, taking advantage of the COVID year of eligibility, playing a key position of this football team. I think he makes a whole lot of sense, and along with Amari Thomas, kind of doing the same way on the defensive line.
Yeah, I think both of those guys make a lot of sense along with Joe Milton. I mean, when you look at Jacob Warren, yeah, he's not one. I mean, I think Cooper Mays was the one that probably came to mind for me first. But Jacob Warren's like having another coach out there on the field for Tennessee. I mean, he's been around the program. He's so valuable. He's such a high IQ guy. He's just very well spoken. He makes a ton of sense, and good for him. And getting the opportunity to go do this, this time around as he, embarks on his final season here at Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, the guys. I mean, he's been through everything at Tennessee. He feels like he's been at Tennessee a decade.
Yep.
That he's played there, and obviously he's an important piece of the puzzle. I think offensively, Jacob makes sense. I think Brew McCoy would have made sense as well. Cooper Mays. I mean, they had plenty of options there to talk about, this team. But again, when they get to those breakout tables, everybody's going to flock to the Joe Milton table to see what he has to say and to have a conversation with him about being the leader of this offense and everything else. So we'll see what Joe has to say. I mean, he's already dropped what is it? Joe doesn't lose in Florida or something, something along those lines.
He'll be asked about that.
I don't think that's exactly how he meant it, but I'm sure it's going to be in every locker in the Florida locker room when their practice for Tennessee comes about that week for sure.
Hubs, Jacob Warren hadn't been here a decade, but if you've been here since before COVID, it just feels like you've been here a decade. All right, if y'all haven't looked at the list, how many quarterbacks do you think are going to be in Nashville?
I have not looked at the list.
All right. I know that our boy, our Rogers, Mississippi State's going to be there.
Will Rogers, correct.
Will Rogers is going to be there. LSU's bringing a quarterback, right?
Jaden Daniels, that's correct. That's 3 total, including Joe.
KJ Jefferson's going to come from Arkansas, right?
KJ Jefferson's there from Arkansas.
I would imagine Spencer Rattler's going to be there for South Carolina.
Didn't Matt just say Spencer Rattler? I don't know.
No.
Matt, who did you just say?
I haven't said anybody. I'm just counting.
Will Rogers, Spencer Rattler, Joe Milton. That's 4. Anybody else?
Is Leary from Kentucky
No,
coming?
he's new. He wouldn't go.
I don't know, Eric. He's like a 6-year transfer, man. It's all about the quarterback position at Kentucky.
It's an upgrade from what they had. There's no doubt. Rob's not here to chime in on that, but I just feel like since he's new, he's not on the list, is he?
You can straight up ask him right now if he drinks mayonnaise in his coffee. That's a storyline in and of itself.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised Kentucky's not bringing Leary. To be honest with you, when you look at where they are, the youth that
Kentucky,
they had.
Eli Cox, Octavius Oxendine, J.J. Weaver. That's it. Four quarterbacks. That's it. That's the list. That's the list. I'm going down it right now. There's a ton of offensive linemen, a ton of defensive linemen.
So all of that diatribe where I said coaches have figured this out is no longer true, right?
Well, it might be true. It might just be a reference. This might just be kind of condemning SEC quarterbacks in 2020.
Well, I mean, you think about it. Ole Miss doesn't know who their guy's going to be. Alabama doesn't know who their guy's going to be. Auburn doesn't know who their guy's going to be. Kirby was not bringing Carson back, right? He was
bringing Brock Bowers, Kamari Lassiter, and Cedric Van Prawn. He's not bringing Tate Ratledge to talk about Neyland Stadium.
He's not bringing Tate Ratledge. He's not bringing anybody that's recently got a speeding ticket, I guess, as well.
Oh my goodness.
Should have said that, right?
The shot from Corey
from the top rope. Robert.
Mercy.
Probably shouldn't have went there. Sorry. But Vanderbilt doesn't. I mean, there's not a lot of proven quarterbacks, right? I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, Jaden Daniels. I mean, if you're listing your top,
nope.
Just not a whole lot of quarterbacks. Let me continue on for Hubbard right there. Not a whole lot of quarterbacks in the SEC because think about it. You're replacing a really good quarterback class that obviously just left. I mean, you got Stetson Bennett, who just coming off a national championship. Hendon Hooker's returning. Anthony Richardson was getting a whole lot of hype. And, of course, Will Levis was getting a whole lot of hype. Plus, Spencer Rattler was a name. You also had Will Rogers, who's been there for a decade. I mean, there were so many quarterbacks in this conversation last year. And Brent, you're having to replace a ton, KJ Jefferson as well. You're having to replace a ton conference wide, so maybe that's why there's not that many.
Well, and so my question is this: who's your top 3 quarterbacks in the league in the preseason?
Great question. Don't know.
KJ Jefferson's up there. Jaden Daniels is up there. And depending on who you ask, probably Will Rogers or.
See, I don't love KJ Jefferson. I have a hard time with that one. I mean, I thought, he lost those receivers from 2 years ago. I thought he was average last year at Arkansas. Now, he didn't have a whole lot of help, I guess, as part of it. But I don't know that I'm buying the KJ Jefferson. Now, Jaden Daniels, he figured it out after Tennessee left town.
Yeah.
He wasn't very good when Tennessee was there, but he started to figure it out, obviously, down the stretch. I don't know. I mean, who the preseason top 3 quarterbacks are going to be versus who the top 3 quarterbacks are, say, the second week of October will be a very different, I think could potentially be a very different list than what you see in the preseason.
Shout out South Carolina. They're bringing a quarterback and they're bringing a punter too. So Kai.
We got a kicker coming.
We got a punter, and they got another guy named Tonka Hemingway. All name team right there. So you got a punter, you got a quarterback, and you got a dude named Tonka Hemingway
to go along with Octavius Oxendine from Kentucky.
That's true too.
Who Tennessee fans are very familiar with. Yeah, there's a lot of good names. Names are going to be in Nashville this year. All right, let's wrap up with this. On 3, kind of shuffled around the rankings, made a new updated rankings list earlier this week. And Matt, a couple of Tennessee commits and targets on the move, a couple jumping into the on 300 and making some moves there.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremiah Hurd's the big mover there, moving up to 292 overall. A guy, I think when you look at the ranking system from top to bottom, you kind of see what you're looking for, verified measurements. And, man, does he have it. Every bit of 6'8", 292, 293 pounds. Has only been playing football for roughly a year. I think he started on about July 14th or somewhere in that range this time last year. Comes from a basketball background, big mover. And he was a big mover in the rankings. So, it's something that's exciting to him. He's even more excited to get back to work at Model High School this week as they get ready to, get rolling toward the fall. And then obviously Braylon Staley climbs up in the rankings. He's number 101. He's the highest Tennessee commit in the rankings right now. Caleb Beasley, I believe, right behind him. I think Caleb Beasley stayed pretty close to where he was at. Jonathan Ankle's still there. Jake Merklinger took a dip. He didn't have a chance to work out this summer, and as we kind of know, that tends to hurt you a little bit in the rankings. Peyton Lewis continues to climb up to around number 218 overall. A guy I think Tennessee nabbed pretty early in the recruiting process. Tip of the cap there to Jerry Mack for getting in on Peyton Lewis early. Tennessee was able to lock him down. Prevent him from taking a visit to South Carolina and letting things, get, more 50-50 there. And then, outside of that, there were some questions on the general's quarters about targets, like Mike Matthews. He fell back from 24th to 32nd. And, my answer to that's simple. I just think overall, I think you're splitting hairs, when you're getting up there that close. I mean, Dylan Raiola has been number 1 at one point in time. Dylan Sturt has been number 1 at one point in time. Williams Nwaneri is now number 1. There's just not a lot of difference between those guys. And when you're basing it on projections around, what their NFL draft stock could be, I think it's hard and you're trying to get it right. You're trying to take a lot of different factors, into effect. But, overall, if you're inside the on 300, or even right on the cusp of it, if you're a 4-star, the industry thinks really, really highly of you, and you have a chance to be a really good football player and play on Sundays.
And regardless, I mean, if you're a Tennessee commit right now, I mean, Tennessee overall, especially with the pool of players that's still chasing, I mean, you're in a good spot. Doesn't matter what doesn't matter where exactly in these rankings are, because Tennessee is pulling from a group of players that it just wasn't a couple years ago. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when you kind of look at, who's left on the board for Tennessee, there's a ton of big names left on there. Daniel Okoye, inside the top 100. Jordan Ross inside the top 100. Mike Matthews inside the top 100. They're going to swing it. Aiden Breland, and there's a ton of guys still on the board for Tennessee inside the on 300. Maybe a guy that hasn't been mentioned as much in terms of rankings, but Bennett Warren inside of the on 300. Maybe not a more important prospect, on the offensive front in this cycle for Tennessee. Amari Jefferson, a guy that we've talked about for a while, being pretty underrated. Tennessee battling Alabama tooth and nail there right now, and he got bumped almost, I think, inside the top 120 range. Ryan Wingo still hanging out there around 97. So for Tennessee overall, still a lot of opportunity out there. But at the end of the day, these rankings are fresh coming out of camp season and 7-on-7 season. There's a whole season left on the field. These things can shift again. So you'll learn a lot more about these guys as they transition from junior year to senior film.
Of course, Tennessee's recruiting class continuing to take shape over the next couple of weeks in the month of July, and a lot of these guys about to gear up for their senior football seasons and senior year of high school. Of course, you got that cookout at the end of July for Tennessee recruiting, so tons and tons and tons of stuff going on over at Volquest.com. And hey, there's no better time than right now to join us over at Volquest.com. Join our family. We got the summer flash sale going on right now. $1 for 1 month, new subscribers only. Come join our family over in the General's Quarters and at Volquest.com as Tennessee gears up for the start of fall camp here in just a couple of weeks. And of course, SEC Media Days, where only 4, right, Grant? 4 quarterbacks?
4 other quarterbacks then, Joe. 5 total, 4 others. Sorry.
5 total quarterbacks will take to the podium, and a lot of defensive linemen and a punter in Nashville at SEC Media Days. We'll have all that coverage over at Volquest.com as well. Appreciate you guys as always. Shout out to Exterior Home Solutions for making this coverage possible. Those summer storms, if you have a need, give them a call today over at 865-524-5888, and they will give you a free estimate. 865-524-5888. For Grant Ramey, Brent Hubbs, and Matt Ray, I am Eric Kane. Appreciate you guys as always for tuning in right here to the Volquest Podcast.